We're more than flesh and blood. More than revenge. All of these things go. You should consider your soul. That's where the real pain lies.
This is your nautical lantern on the dangerous seas of darkness. Let's push off from the placid shore of the status quo and explore what's beyond the horizon. I am your host, BT, and this is Truth and Shadow, your podcast of the supernatural.
When we talk about truth, we understand that it's out there. Different cultures, different peoples have experienced it in ways that we find interesting or peculiar. We're drawn to certain civilizations. Sumerian mania has its grasp on many authors from the 70s all the way up to the modern time. Göbekli Tepe, Karahan Tepe, they're the new fascination. Once upon a time, it was the ancient Egyptians. But today, in this episode, we're going to talk about the Vikings, and maybe they knew more about some of this truth than we do. Imagine a world where gods walked among men, where fate is a living thing woven by unseen hands, and where death is just another doorway in a cosmic war older than time itself. The Norse didn't just believe in myths or fairy tales, they lived them, shaping their world with blood, sacrifice, and whispers of an unseen order. Were they tapping into something real? Something ancient? Something beyond? Today, we're going to go deep into the spiritual world of the Vikings, where reality bends, and the supernatural is just a heartbeat away. To truly grasp the depth of Viking spirituality, we need to look beyond the surface level myths and into the fundamental ways in which they perceived reality itself. This wasn't just a set of stories about gods and heroes. It was a worldview that structured their entire understanding of existence, the unseen forces at work, and their places within a cosmic hierarchy. To do that, we must explore their relationship with destiny, their connection to the spiritual landscape, and the ways their beliefs influence their culture, ethics, and interactions with the supernatural. We'll also deepen the connection between their worldview and the broader theological ideas discussed by Dr. Michael Heiser, particularly concerning the divine hierarchies, the unseen realm, and this interplay between spiritual beings and human history. One of the most striking aspects of Viking spirituality is how it framed time and destiny. Unlike the modern Western perspective, which often assumes a linear progression from creation to apocalypse, the Norse viewed time as cyclical and interconnected. This was embodied in their concept of weird. which was not simply fate in a deterministic sense, but a weaving of past, present, and future into a living story. The Norns, who wove the threads of existence at the roots of Yggdrasil, weren't just writing a predetermined script. They were maintaining the integrity of a vast, living system that included both divine decree and mortal agency. And this aligns closely with this biblical and ancient Near Eastern view of time. It was where God's sovereignty and human free will are not in conflict but function in this dynamic relationship. And Dr. Heiser had often emphasized that in the biblical worldview, divine beings, including angels and fallen ones, all the rest of the sinister forces, had real influence over history. Yet they operated within God's ultimate plan, a striking parallel to the way Vikings saw the interplay between their own actions and the inexorable flow of fate. This understanding of destiny deeply influenced Viking ethics. Honor, loyalty, and courage were not just valued for their social or military utility, but were seen as spiritual imperatives. Living in accordance with one's destiny was part of maintaining the cosmic balance. This is why warriors sought to meet death in battle rather than weakness. Dying well meant aligning oneself with the divine order of things. But it's crucial to note that this wasn't just about reaching Valhalla. It was about participating in the greater narrative of existence itself. Even the gods were bound by the forces of the destiny, and their own fates were sealed. Odin's obsessive search for wisdom was, in part, an attempt to understand and navigate this system. Yet, even he could not escape Ragnarok. Another crucial element of Viking spirituality is this role of sacred spaces and objects in mediating the divine presence. Their belief in a land where spirits inhabited forests, rivers, and mountains points to a world where the material and the spiritual are deeply intertwined. A particular grove or rock wasn't just a piece of nature. It could be a dwelling place of divine power. This is why certain locations were considered holy and why rituals often took place in natural settings rather than in artificial temples. The biblical parallel is striking. See, Dr. Heiser's work on sacred geography shows how ancient Israelite and Near Eastern traditions viewed specific locations as spiritually charged. Mountains, in particular, were seen as places where the divine and mortal realms intersected. The Norse concept of Yggdrasil, the great world tree that connected different realms, functions, oddly enough, in the same way the biblical idea of a cosmic mountain like Sinai or Zion, where heaven and earth touch. And it was the Vikings who held this unique perspective on the soul and spiritual consciousness. Unlike the Christian view, which often treats the soul as a singular, invisible entity, the Norse beliefs were more complex. They spoke of multiple spiritual components, like the mind and spirit, or the personal luck or their fortune, which can go through generations of people. They also talk about their guardian spirit, which would manifest or could manifest in different forms. And these ideas suggest a highly dynamic view of identity, where one's spiritual presence could extend beyond the physical body and even influence future generation. And one of the most underexplored aspects of Viking spirituality is their interactions with non-human intelligences. See, beyond their gods, they recognized a vast array of spiritual entities. Some of them were benevolent, some hostile, and many whose motivations were inscrutable. The dwarves were master craftsmen, often possessing knowledge beyond that of the gods. The giants were not merely evil adversaries, but primordial beings with roles in the balance of creation. And in that complex view, it mirrors this biblical perspective on the divine council and the spiritual beings that populate the unseen realm. You see, Dr. Heiser's discussions on the Bene Elohim and the fallen watchers of the Book of Enoch draws these fascinating parallels. These beings, too, were not simply good or evil in the simplistic black and white sense, but had roles and functions within the divine order, even when they opposed God's purposes. So when we look at the Vikings, we talk about is their relationship with their gods, which are strikingly different from monotheistic traditions. Now, while they certainly revere the Asir and the Vanir, they did not see them as infallible or omnipotent. The gods were powerful, wise, worthy of worship, but they were also bound by fate, vulnerable to deception, and in some cases, doomed to die. This is perhaps one of the most profound distinctions between the Norse religion and Christian theology, but it still contains echoes of what Dr. Heiser's emphasis on the biblical divine counsel has to say. In both of these worldviews, there is an understanding that the spiritual world is not monolithic, but structured. There are high gods, beings in between, spirits that operate at different levels of authority. The Viking gods, much like the Elohim mentioned in Psalm 82, are powerful, but ultimately accountable to a higher cosmic order. And so perhaps the most intriguing link between this Viking and the biblical spirituality is their view of that cosmic conflict. In the Viking eschatology, Ragnarok is not merely an apocalypse, it's a divine reckoning. The old world passes away, but from its ashes arise a new one. Some of the gods perish, others endure, some of humanity survives to rebuild. This theme of divine struggle, renewal, and restoration finds strong echoes in some biblical prophecy, where the final judgment is not merely the destruction, but the beginning of a new heaven and a new earth. And Heiser's work on the defeat of the rebellious spiritual powers in biblical eschatology reflects a similar motif. Chaos is ultimately overcome, not through annihilation, but through the restoration of divine order. All of this points back to a much deeper spiritual reality than the popular image of the Vikings as raiders and warriors. They lived in a world where the seen and unseen were deeply connected, where their actions had spiritual consequences, where the forces governing their lives extended far beyond the mortal realm. Their myths, their beliefs were not just stories. They were reflections of a cosmic system that they were part of, whether as warriors, seers, or farmers, wives, mothers. But to push even deeper into Viking spirituality, we need to explore the liminal spaces they inhabited. Not just physical places like sacred groves or burial mounds, but the conceptual and existential spaces where the boundaries between the divine, the human, and the supernatural blurred. Their world was one of constant negotiation between forces seen and unseen, where the spiritual and material were not separate but deeply intertwined. Understanding this fluid relationship between the mortal and the divine unlocks new layers of meaning in their myths, rituals, and societal structures. Furthermore, the implications of their beliefs stretch into a broader conversation about how ancient cultures perceive the cosmos, the gods, and their own place in this divine drama. One of the most overlooked and perhaps profound aspects of Norse spirituality is their concept of reciprocal obligation. We might call it divine economy. The gods were not omnibenevolent beings who freely dispensed blessings without expectation. They engaged in a system of exchange with mortals. Sacrifice, both literal and metaphorical, was central to this relationship. The Vikings understood that to gain divine favor, one had to give something of value in return, whether through blood offerings, personal suffering, or acts of honor. Odin's own sacrifice, hanging himself on the Yggdrasil tree for 9 nights, giving up his eye for wisdom, is a story that reflects this cosmic economy, where power and knowledge must be earned through personal cost. This idea of sacrifice extended beyond the gods and into everyday life. There's a concept of ritual duels fought over honor. It was not just about resolving disputes. It was a spiritual act that reinforced the cosmic order. And by engaging in such battles, warriors were not just defending personal reputation, but aligning themselves with the values of courage, truth, and destiny. Death in such a battle was not merely an end, but a fulfillment of one's role in the grand narrative. And this bears an interesting resemblance to a Christian understanding of martyrdom, where standing firm in faith, even unto death, is seen as an act that transcends the physical and carries eternal significance. A related concept that deeply shaped Viking thought is luck. But it's far more profound than mere fortune. It's a form of inherited spiritual power passed down through families, which could grow or diminish based on one's actions. A warrior who fought bravely strengthened his lineage luck, while a coward or oath breaker could bring ruin upon himself and his descendants. So this belief reinforced a social cohesion and the importance of legacy. One's deeds did not end with death, but rippled through generations. The biblical parallel here, oddly enough, is pretty striking, particularly in the Old Testament's emphasis on generational blessings and curses. When we talk about Dr. Michael Heiser's research, it highlights how ancient Israelites' own thought also recognized the idea of spiritual inheritance, where the choices of ancestors had profound consequences on their descendants. The Viking relationship with the dead, also a compelling window into their spiritual world. Unlike the stark heaven and hell dualism of Christian theology, the Norse viewed the afterlife as multifaceted. One can go to Valhalla, Folkvanir, Halheim, or other realms. But the dead were not necessarily distant or inaccessible. Ancestral spirits remained involved in the affairs of the living, sometimes as protectors, other times as restless entities, ghosts that needed appeasement. Dr. Heiser has written about biblical and extra-biblical texts that depict the spirits of the dead as more than passive souls. They could be consulted, such as the case of Saul and the medium at Endor. And so the Vikings, who practice this ancestor veneration, where the dead are honored not just for memory's sake, but also because they still have power, is a similar idea. Now to talk about something a little bit more dark, ritual magic. Particularly the practice of Seer, which also reveals a sophisticated understanding of spiritual mechanics. This magic is often associated with Odin and the vulva, the seeress. It was a form of shamanic magic used for divination, curse weaving, and altering fate. And what's fascinating is that this practice was considered unmanly. And so when it was performed by men, it suggests that the Vikings saw different spiritual roles for men and women. So women, particularly Valur, wielded tremendous spiritual authority, acting as intermediaries between the mortal and divine realms. It was the vulva, the women. They were not just oracles, but also spiritual engineers. They manipulated the unseen forces in ways that seem to mirror some of the mystical traditions found in Second Temple Jewish literature. Heiser had frequently discusses how figures like Enoch and the prophets engaged in divine encounters that blurred this line between human and celestial experience. And so it's the same with the vulva in Norse society. Could step into the spiritual realm, see hidden truths, and alter reality in accordance with the will of the gods, or her own intentions. Another overlooked aspect of Norse spirituality is the way they viewed language itself as a form of power. The runes were not merely an alphabet, but a system of encoded divine knowledge. Odin's sacrifice to gain the wisdom of the runes shows that these symbols, the runes, were more than just for writing. They were the ways, maybe even the keys to shape reality. This idea of worlds as instruments of power shares a common feature in the Bible. It's the Logos in John's Gospel. The Norse belief that language has an intrinsic force is a parallel to this. We talk about Dr. Heisers' exploration of divine speech, specifically in relation to the way God's word operates both in creation and prophecy. One could say it resonates with the ancient Norse understanding that words, when wielded correctly, shape destiny itself. And finally, the eschatological vision of the Vikings, the way they viewed the end of the world, the renewal of the cosmos. It really does offer a profound point of comparison to biblical theology. Ragnarok is not a meaningless apocalypse, it's a necessary purification, a breaking of the old world to make way for the new. So the idea that some gods perish while others endure, and that a new world arises from the runes, suggests that even within this seemingly bleak vision, there is hope. There's a positive outcome. And we know that evil is destroyed, chaos is defeated, and a new creation emerges, perfect and restored, as mentioned in the Revelation of John. In both these Viking and biblical worldviews, the concept of the cosmos is not static. It's a battlefield where divine order is constantly contending with chaos. The sinister forces, whether they be Loki and his monstrous children or the rebellious spiritual beings in the Bible, they're allowed a season of influence, but they do not have the final victory. In the end, order is restored and a new divine age begins. This cyclical but transformative vision of time is something many ancient cultures shared. Yet, I have to say that the Vikings' vision of this is uniquely vivid in its brutality and grandeur. Ultimately, what makes Viking spirituality so compelling, and why it resonates, in my opinion, with Heisers' work, is it's deeply participatory in nature. The gods are not distant, the spiritual world was not passive, and fate was not something to be merely accepted, but to be engaged with. The Vikings understood that they were part of a vast, ongoing struggle, one that encompassed gods, spirits, ancestors, and their own descendants. Their myths, their rituals, and their values were all structured around this active relationship with the supernatural. And this is not unlike the biblical worldview, where humans, divine beings, and God himself are all engaged in a cosmic narrative that is still unfolding. And the more we explore these connections, the more it becomes clear that ancient people, whether Norse or Israelite, Sumerian or Egyptian, they saw reality in a fundamentally different way than modern materialists. They lived in a world that was alive with spiritual powers, one where every action, every word, every oath had consequences that echoed beyond their life, beyond the physical world. Understanding this mindset doesn't just give us insight into the Viking beliefs. It helps us rediscover the ancient way of seeing the cosmos, the perspective that, though often forgotten, still lingers in the fabric of history and myth. So what if the Vikings weren't just telling stories? What if their world, a realm where God schemed and fate could be rewritten and the dead still had a voice, was closer to the truth we're willing to admit? Maybe their myths weren't fantasy, but fragments of something ancient, something real, something we've forgotten. From the halls of Valhalla to the shadows of Ragnarok, the Norse saw a universe alive with unseen forces. a cosmic struggle that echoes across time, and if that's true, well, maybe the end isn't the end after all. Maybe it's just the beginning.
Thank you for listening. This is a free podcast based upon the value for value model. If you find value in this, or any episode, you can return that value by liking the show, subscribing to this channel, leaving a review, or sharing with a friend on your social media accounts. You can also donate on my website. Thank you again. This is BT for Truth and Shadow Podcast. You are the light in the darkness.
Whispers of dawn in the waking sky, golden threads weave the clouds as they sigh. The world breathes soft in a gentle embrace, each petal forward a hymn to this place. Mountains rise, their crowns kissed by light. Rivers dance, reflecting the night. Each tree a sentinel, steadfast and tall, guardians of beauty, answering nature's call. Oh, the road winds on through valleys and hills, a symphony born of the earth's quiet thrills. Yet my heart beats loud for the soul by my side, my love, my companion, my endless guide. Fields of gold stretch as far as the eye, their whispers caught in the breezes reply. The scent of pine, the salt of the sea, this boundless trail sets our spirits free. We've braved the storm, felt the sun's truthful bliss, each mile a chapter, each turn a caress. Through the heart of the world our journey unfolds, and the greatest treasure is the love that we hold. Oh, the road winds on through valleys and hills, a symphony born of the earth's quiet thrills. Yet my heart beats loud for the soul by my side, my love, my companion, my endless guide. In your eyes the sun's gentle gleam,